Well, hello everybody out there in Facebook Live and on our website. We are so glad to have you guys here today. If you are tuning in tonight, no matter where you tune in from, a special live session called What to Do With Your Worry. This is something that is we as leaders have thought about and agonized over in figuring out how can we better help people to overcome worry in this troubling time. And so tonight, we're going to spend some time talking about this subject at length, and we have some great people here that we'll be doing this with. And over the course of this hour, we're going to have questions. We're going to have a time of questions that we already have prepared. We're going to have questions that are be submitted by you, the viewers, and we'll also have some other information I think that is very helpful, more specifically geared toward this time. You can't do a great session like this without having great people. And so sitting right here to my left is a very awesome, godly woman. This is my wife, Tamara Glenn. She graduated in 2015 from the University of Mississippi Medical Center. She has a PhD in psychiatry. Am I correct in assuming that?
I have an MD, and I completed psychiatry residency training. That's right,
okay. And on top of that, on top of her residency, she's currently doing a sleep medicine fellowship for UMC at the Select Specialty Hospital. Tamara, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Just that I enjoy managing patients' mental health and improving their mental wellness overall, both inside the body of Christ and outside the body of Christ. But my purpose and passion is making sure that the church is able to address mental health needs of everyone that we encounter.
Amen. Well, and not only that, we have my co-pastor. He is a former missionary to Zimbabwe as well as to Cornwall, England. He has been a pastor in this community for over 20 years. He is a proud husband and a proud father as well. I have, of course, Dr. Jeff Barker. So, Brother Jeff, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Well, no, I'm glad to be here tonight. I'm glad to be here too with Tamara and Reggie, and mostly able to hopefully maybe answer some questions that people are having.
Good deal. Well, I just want to remind everybody that as we begin to take on this conversation, a couple of things. Number one, there's a reminder here. Some of you guys may be watching on Facebook Live, and some of you guys may be watching on ssbaptistchurch.com on our live stream page. But I want to remind you guys that as you're watching this, especially if you're on Facebook Live, please share this conversation with anybody who you think needs to hear it. This is an opportunity because we know that these are troubling times, and we know that many people are struggling with different issues, including anxiety, depression, all kinds of thoughts, and all kinds of thoughts and feelings at a time like this. And for some people, there is a lot of uncertainty. So please, if you would, as we're having this conversation, feel free to invite friends, share the link on your pages, and also make sure that even if after this is done, make sure to reshare it so that people can begin to see or at least have a chance to see this privately, even if they don't see it live. So really, really stress that. Really share this post so they can get a little bit of traction. Also want to make sure that you mention, for those of you guys who are watching on Facebook Live, I want to remind you guys that if time permits, we're going to have a moment where you guys are able to ask questions. So if you are looking at this live stream on Facebook, feel free to comment right under the live stream, and there is a chance that we may answer your question. We may answer your question during the broadcast. So you may not, even if you don't have questions right now, as we're going along and you have a question, feel free to drop it into the comments, and I'll be scrolling here. I'll have my laptop, so I'll be scrolling through at various times as we keep the conversation moving to possibly use your question as something that we can address within the middle of the conversation. Let's see. So as we get ready to jump and dive into this conversation, a couple of quick things. I want us to kind of start, as we think about this idea of what to do when you're worried. I don't want to just start with the conversation of the practical things. I want to start with the conversation of God's word. Okay? And so with that being said, I have a couple of verses that I would like to read. And as I read the verses, I would like to kind of, if you would, tell me as you hear these verses, or even in your own personal walk, what do these verses mean? Or maybe there are other verses that you're thinking about that may apply in this time. Okay? So for those viewers at home, if you would, I'm going to be reading a couple of verses, and so if you would, just kind of take a listen. The first verse that I have here is Psalms 94 and 19, and here's what it reads. And this is the NIV version. It reads this. It says, anxiety in a man's heart weighs him down, but a good word makes him glad. I tell you what, as we read that verse, is there anything that initially comes to your mind? As I think about it, first of all, and I'll take the first shot here, I think about the idea that, one of the things that I realize now, especially, being in the pastorate, being someone who's earning or working on earning his MDiv and is learning a lot about pastoral ministry, you see people and you see them being bogged down by these various thoughts, these feelings. Sometimes there may even be sin, all these different things that kind of drag us as we're trying to look towards God, live a godly life, and trying to figure out the best way to please Him. So when I think about this verse, I think about the idea that anxiety is something that really does put a weight on somebody. Like, what do you guys think about that?
Go ahead, Dr. Glenn.
I was going to defer to the pastor, who's also a doctor.
We just heard from a pastor, so I like hearing from a medic, because I think it's interesting because, first of all, Dr. Glenn is not only a doctor, she's a Christian, she's a professional, she's also a mother. And I know for a lot of moms, a lot of working moms, a lot of moms that are home, a lot of kids that are home with mom, there's a lot of stress and anxiety, and I know they feel, overwhelmed. So I would like to hear your thoughts.
So as Reggie was reading the verse, the first thing that came to mind is that our flesh has a tendency towards anxiety and towards worry. While as Christians, we have the Holy Spirit dwelling in us who gives us the opportunity to experience peace. So, if we spend time with the Lord and walk with Him, then we're closer and closer to experiencing the peace of God. And what that verse also tells us is that if we hear the right word at the right time, then that can bring peace even when it's not our natural tendency. So even for the unbeliever, if we share the right word at the right time, then we can give them just a small piece of the peace that Christ offers us.
I think about, Jesus with Mary and Martha. At one point Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus, enjoying the fellowship, while Martha is busy in the kitchen and becomes very upset. And Jesus summed her up when she admonished Jesus. She said, Lord, don't you care that I'm in here doing all this work? Well, my sister's kind of lazy and indifferent to everything I'm doing. And Jesus, he worded it to me this way, if I remember. He said, Martha, and he always, when he gets on to you, it's your name twice. Martha, Martha, like Simon, Simon. Martha, Martha, you are anxious about many things, and Mary has chosen one thing that can't be taken away from her. And I think when you share that scripture about being weighed down, in the Greek, the Greek is a beautiful word language, but it's also a beautiful language as far as pictures. And the picture of anxiety is to be pulled in many different directions all at once. And I'm sure for, let's say, a stay-at-home, a working mom who is at home, who now has children at home, who has maybe a husband at home, who's dealing with a menu that she's having to learn how to bake bread, she is feeling overwhelmed, anxious, heavy, because she feels pulled in a lot of different directions. As well as a breadwinner. The breadwinner in the home, in many ways, may be the most anxious of all because they're worried about practical things such as finances.
I like to add, being the leader of my household, I felt a certain bit of anxiety myself. And it's not, as the provider of my house, there's this feeling of, will you be able to gather all we need? Even as, in these beginning days, many people are probably very, very much aware of this now. Like you would go to the store and you wouldn't see things on the shelf, and you realize that you don't have the things that you need or want, for that matter, whatever the case may be, to be able to take home. And that's kind of a feeling, especially for me as a man and a leader, of that feeling of, man, that I'm going out to try to provide for my family, and I don't, or I can't find the resources. Will we find what we need?
Well, I think, here again, I think if we went ahead and we looked at a couple of these questions, there is one down here where people are simply afraid, moms and dads, of being able to acquire the things they need in order to cook meals, hygiene, to take care of their families. And I think, what happens a lot of times is we do inventory and we begin to think to ourselves, wait a minute, some of these things are not critical to life.
Right.
I can live without, this is funny, but the reality is we could live without toilet paper.
Yeah.
We could live.
Yeah. There are several options, right?
There is the possibility that we are all keeping a cotton diaper with us, to be switched out. Back when I was a kid growing up, Mom took diapers and did them down in the toilet and flushed the toilet several times. And then, years ago, people did what they had to do. And so, we have to also determine if some of these worries are about things that are really non-essential. We could live without them if we had to.
Right. As we talk about it, the first thing that comes to my mind without even looking at my Bible is Matthew 6, right? Yeah. It talks about, of course, there's a lot there that Jesus talks about, but more specifically between like 25 to 34, about 3 times he makes mentions of the words, do not worry. He says, do not worry about, what you'll eat today. Do not worry about the clothing. Do not worry about what you will do in this time, because and I'm jumping up to Matthew 6:33, right? It says, "Seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added to you." It just reminds me, there are times when, and I think you're right, Brother Jeff. I think there are times where we find ourselves thinking that something we have is a need, when it actually is probably more of a want. We perceive as, for instance, just recently we went on a youth retreat. And on this youth retreat, honestly, I thought they were going to riot and throw us out and kill us. But the reality is I had 24 teenagers on the trip with us. And one of the rules of the trip was that throughout the day, the only thing, there are a couple of things you can't have. Number one, we're not going to have any TVs. Number one, thank God there really wasn't any TVs around except for like one. But the other thing that they couldn't have throughout the day was their cell phone. And you can only imagine, separating a teen from their cell phone is like separating a soul from a body. And so you can just imagine the blowback and the huffs and so how are we going to communicate? How are we going to find directions? I'm like, well, we're your leaders. We're going to help you, right? And so over the course of the trip, and keep in mind, this is about 5 days in the mountains with bad reception without a cell phone, right? And over the course of the 4 to 5 days, as they began to interact with each other, they started to realize that, you know what? I can live without my cell phone. They had more conversation. They actually interacted with each other. Like in the beginning of the trip, they could hardly talk to each other. And then by the next day, guess what they were doing? They were substituting and subsidizing not having the phone with real life interactions and conversations. And they only got a chance to use their cell phones at the end of the day. So it was like 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And they would literally almost forget until you pull the phones out and they're like, oh, it's breathe, it's the phone, right? But it just reminds me of that, like, there are things that we think we need that we really honestly don't. And it helps us figure out what's really a priority in life.
You were asking about a scripture, and I thought about where Paul in 2 Corinthians says, take every thought captive to make it obedient unto Christ. And I think Tamara, in the area of obsessive compulsive behaviors or thinking that becomes out of control, where people find themselves spiraling to a degree of worry. When does worry and anxiety become a clinical medical condition to where somebody they feel they're becoming obsessive compulsive and they're getting to a point they can't function?
So that's a really good question, Brother Jeff. And most of the diagnoses in the DSM-5 are characterized by symptoms that bring a person to the point where, as Brother Jeff said, they're not able to function. They're having difficulties in interpersonal relationships, they're having difficulties on the job, and they're distressed in a number of ways. So it's normal for all of us to worry to some degree. We have fleeting thoughts, sometimes the thoughts linger, but as long as we're able to take control of those thoughts and bring them into subjection, we wouldn't classify that as a clinical case of either anxiety or OCD. But when the thoughts get to a point where they're consuming a significant amount of time from your day and causing you to not be the parent that you want to be, causing you to not be the employee that you need to be, then it's time to consider chatting with a mental health professional.
Okay. Because to me that there may be people out there that are at this point, you know, to me, Sheila and I, we were talking about being missionaries. And one of the things when you first get to a mission field, like in the case of Zimbabwe, everything is unfamiliar. And because of that, you enter what we call culture shock. Dr. Stan May and Iva, people who are gifted in the area of chronological Bible, seminary professor, pastor, they helped us through that. You know, they gave us guidance because we felt literally at a point we were overwhelmed and we're not going to survive. And I think some anxiety that people are experiencing is because we are in, as a nation, unfamiliar territory. Culturally, we're cut off, we're isolated. Our lives have been so dramatically changed and have become so unfamiliar that that breeds a level of fear, anxiety. Again, my thought would be, I know in the mission field, we found people that were older, mature, people that had already been on the field for a while, that could help give guidance and help us through that, which that's important. What other ways? I think that's a question people are asking. How do I cope with this anxiety and fear when so much is unfamiliar to me? My world is so different. You know, my normal schedule, getting up, getting the kids ready, going to school, going to work, doing this, their whole lives have been traumatized.
Would you, Dr. Glenn, would you classify that too as, in a very, I guess, simplistic way, would you think of it as being like people are fearful because they've lost control of what is familiar, so to speak?
I can agree with both of you. I do think some people feel like they've lost control. Their lives have been disrupted in ways that they never imagined could be possible. One of the things that I have found interesting, though, is that as I chatted with friends and family members and even some professional friends about how they're sort of coping with things, one of the things that I found is that those who trust in Christ are much more at peace than those who are not. And I do think to some degree that the peace that people have right now is determined by how much they've practiced trusting Christ up until this point. So, if you find yourself in a position where you realize you haven't been trusting Christ as much as you need to, then I do encourage you to go ahead and start now. With all of this free time, one of the things that you could be doing is spending time in the Word. Look up scriptures about worry. Reggie just mentioned, Pastor Glenn just mentioned Matthew chapter 6, verses 33 to 34. If we seek first God's kingdom, if we do what He's called us to do, then He'll be careful to add back everything that we lack. And there are many, many stories in the Bible where we see God is able to do so much more with our limited resources than we're ever able to do on our own. So it is important to seek Christ in this time It is also important to reach out to other people. I know we can't go and visit people, where that's certainly discouraged, especially in groups larger than 10, but we can reach out to people through Zoom, Facebook, FaceTime. There are lots of media. Are there any others that you would mention?
No, I think those are the primary ones, but even if it's as basic as a text or as more visual, or Google Hangouts for like large groups, I would say. There are different ways that we can still have that social interaction, and I think that's something we can allude to a little bit more as we get into one of the particular cases that I was thinking about.
And people might also consider checking with their insurance to see if they offer any online resources. I know that Talkspace is one of the mental health apps that's available for people to talk with a professional as needed to sort of work through some of the anxieties that they're having during this time.
And as you were talking, Dr. Glenn, I was thinking about another verse I have right here, John 14:27. The words of Jesus here. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you, not as the world gives to you, but I do as I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid. So it's talking about the idea that as Jesus came to give peace, he doesn't want to give us peace like the world does. Just think about it from a very practical standpoint. And I think this is something that, all of the hysteria in the midst of this pandemic has kind of unearthed for a lot of us, is that maybe sometimes in some cases, and brother, you may be able to speak to this a little bit more, but just from your pastoral experience, I would say, I think this pandemic is kind of helping us to see where we find our peace. Like for some people, we find peace in the fact that our bank account is full. And now that, maybe business is going bad, I don't know. I'm just kind of surmising, but maybe business is going bad because of a lot of stoppage because workers are not there. Maybe people find peace in a certain place that they can go, but now they can't go because now they're at home, right? Or maybe it's forcing people to deal with problems, whether it's at home or somewhere else, that now they're having to come to grips with. Who knows? What do you think?
I think that, I think anytime we're in a crisis, we do inventory.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, I mean, financially, Sheila and I, and even in some of the questions here, we see people just basically, one of the more practical problems is people in their finances. People are being laid off. People that were dual income, now they're single income. Some people have been laid off with no promise of being rehired. Yeah. So there's a great deal of fear. Some of it's practical. Financially, people have to sit down as a couple, as a family. They have to do inventory. We went back, looking back through our checkbook, looking back through our spending habits over the last 3 to 6 months, determining what we could do without. Immediately trying to streamline and then budget. So some things are very practical that families just have to sit down and they have to do together. Yeah. The other thing is, and I think, Reggie, you brought up something a moment ago. You talked about control. Yeah. And I would say that even Dr. Glenn would probably say that a lot of the problems that people face, psychiatric issues, stem from the lack of feeling as if they're in control of their life. Yeah. And very much right now, people feel out of control. And I think you brought up something, Dr. Glenn, when you talked about we're being drawn back to the very principles of our faith. God is sovereign. So first of all, we've never been in control. God is in control. He's sovereign, and the word sovereign implies the idea of reigning, over, controlling. So I think, we talk about what we need to survive, and we're sitting here kind of laughing and saying we don't have to have wet wipes, and we don't have to have toilet paper. We can do what our grandparents may have done when they were rationing goods in World War II. So we, to me, it brings us back to the very foundations of our faith and what we believe. We're being tested to see what we put our faith and trust in, as you said a moment ago, and as you are alluding to as well.
Okay, so as we so let's transition here. I mean, we've kind of already been in the mode of looking at certain certain aspects of basically some of the things that the coronavirus is, or this pandemic is kind of causing us to look at. And so what we have here is a few different thoughts and questions, or a few different ideas from different people. And so what we'll do is we'll read these out, and then we'll begin to kind of discuss some of the aspects of them that we can kind of dive into, and hopefully not only just talk about the practical side of it, but also maybe get some spiritual implication and some hope there. All right. Okay. So with that being said, here's the first one. All right. Let's see. So this first question, these first concerns, I should say. This person is an extroverted single. Their family lives far away, and for them it's very hard to have, meaningful interaction in the world. But the social isolation is especially difficult since they used to have to isolate on purpose, and it hurt. But now, they're working through and pursuing relationships with others and receiving appropriate, affection. Now they're being intentionally isolated, and it's pretty tough. All right. So, so think about this. So basically, it's a single who likes to interact with people, but now they're having to kind of force themselves to be isolated now, and they're having a hard time trying to adjust with that. So what are your thoughts on that?
So, I can imagine that it is very difficult for extroverts during this time. I personally am an introvert, probably the introvert of all introverts, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. 1A, because I feel like I'm an extrovert. Okay. I'm an introvert like
You're
that.
an introvert as well. Okay.
But go ahead.
So it's our season. Introverts are like, yes. We're not having to be invited to places. We get to just chill at home and just enjoy.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Social distancing comes naturally. So, but at the same time, I do understand that for extroverts who get their energy from interacting with other people, it's something that they need to thrive in the world. And I think the question also alluded to actual physical touch as a single. So getting a hug from someone at church is very meaningful to someone who's single. And in her case, I think what she's experiencing, both through in-person interactions and through physical touch, is she's experiencing a release of dopamine. So the physical touch triggers a neurochemical release that sort of stimulates the pleasure center in the brain. One of the things that I think could be done by extroverts during this time is to find other ways to mimic that dopamine release. Exercise, going for a walk, finding other things that you really enjoy doing. Maybe a hearty laugh from your favorite comedian. Find one of their videos, a YouTube channel or something. But there are lots of ways to cause the same neurochemical release that you could experience from the physical affection and from the in-person interactions.
It's interesting here because I think that what can happen to people is they feel as if, people often will say this dealing with what chronic depression. People almost feel like they're in a hole they can't get out of. They're in a dark place. One of the things is we have to project life beyond this. Yes. This is not going to last. Right. Sheila was reading last night on Facebook a woman in China who was saying to Americans, enjoy this. This is short-lived. We've been isolated for a couple of months. She said, I love a cup of coffee. She said, I love going into a coffee place, having a cup of coffee. She says, you begin to appreciate the things you took for granted. There's life beyond this. I watch, even though the football season, NBA's canceled, a lot of the baseball's not playing. You can go to YouTube, you can look at old games. I'm watching the talk around Tom Brady going to Tampa Bay, and the people calling the herd. Yeah. One of the things that, as I listen to him, he's not talking about the coronavirus. He's talking about, will Tom Brady bring such a change and a dynamic to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that they're going to come back this next year and be a Super Bowl contender. And then Ledge and I, my son, we were talking about, what about if it ended up the Patriots playing the, and immediately I see a response out of you. I think sometimes that we have to do things, and Dr. Glenn, I think you may allude to this, we have to do things that are therapeutic to the mind, to remind us this is short. We'll be out of this. Things will begin to pick up, move on. Even the Congress, the stimulus package, the market beginning to respond, people beginning to be a little more positive. I think that we have to constantly see and we have to incorporate, and I think that's what you're saying to extrovert, but we all have to, even introverts, incorporate some of these, a good movie, a good comedian, NFL, whatever it is, in an MBA,
This is a time for us to be creative and innovative, to find new interests, to find new ways of stimulating dopamine production so that we can be happy and lead ourselves away from depression into a fulfilled life when we can't do what we normally do.
And there are a lot of professional men and women in sports who are deep men and women of faith. Tony Dungy's as I say, think of Tampa Bay, Super Bowl. Tony Dungy is just an unbelievable figure who he just exudes faith and trust in the Lord, and has gone through his own trials in his own family. This is a man who understands suffering.
And so even for that person who's feeling isolated and wants that, wants to be able to connect with people. I know earlier we did mention a few practical things, like we did talk about things like video chat, FaceTiming, things of that nature. But even then, I know you mentioned something about exercise. I know some people kind of have the fear about, like, for instance, going out and going for a run, going for a walk. Is there any way you could address kind of, if you can, a little bit of the health aspect of that? Because some people are kind of afraid to even be out lonely, running or walking amongst people and think, oh my gosh, I'm going to breathe in something.
So social distancing is important. Social distancing means at baseline, staying at home as often as you can, not meeting in large groups. Groups larger than 10 is certainly discouraged during this time. But it's also important to sort of space or distance yourself when you are outside of the house. We still have to leave the house, especially for this single woman. I'm sure there's some things that Amazon can deliver, but some things you just have to still go to the store to pick up. So when we are at the store, when we do have the opportunity to go out for a walk, during those times we can be around people as long as we keep ourselves 6 feet away from the nearest person. So that limits our ability to inhale respiratory droplets, and it limits our ability to touch and sort of share germs or microorganisms with each other.
How does this flatten the curve? Can you explain that real quickly?
Sure. Flattening the curve is an algorithm or a graph that sort of explains the number of anticipated cases of coronavirus or COVID-19 over time. And it's estimated that without social distancing, we can see large numbers of COVID-19 cases. And just to explain, there are a number of coronaviruses. So just a little bit of background on coronavirus. There are a number of coronaviruses. We've probably all been exposed to at least one coronavirus in our lifetime. It was probably a very mild cold that we got over and didn't have any symptoms, any severe symptoms from. We could pick up something from over the counter at the store and we were fine. What's different about this virus is that it leads to the symptoms that are characterized by COVID-19, which are cough, shortness of breath, and fever that can often escalate to a severe pneumonia and sometimes severe respiratory distress that requires a person to go to the ICU and require a assistance breathing, usually by a respirator. So what we want to do by flattening the curve is to decrease the number of cases of patients who need severe treatment or who develop severe symptoms and require ICU treatment for those symptoms. So it's important for us to practice social distancing so that we lower the number of COVID-19 cases overall, so that we maintain our healthcare system's ability to respond to the severe cases.
So this is a communal type disease that if you can flatten that curve, meaning that you can keep community from coming together. I think it was interesting, and you said this to me when we were first trying to decide the first Sunday, and you convinced me, Brother Jeff, we do not need to bring our people together. And you brought up the NBA. You said, the NBA, when you look at the NFL, NBA, baseball, but you brought up the NBA, you're talking about a not million, but you're talking about $1 billion industry that put the brakes immediately, stopping the season. And you said logically, this should send a very clear message to us all that this needs to be taken seriously.
And one of the reasons it's so concerning is that we don't know enough about this virus. We don't know enough about the symptoms that it causes to make us feel safe, allowing people to commune together. So we don't know who is likely to have the severe symptoms from the disease. Right now we know that children tend to be protected from it. We know that older people who have comorbid or other medical illnesses tend to have more severe symptoms. But we also see perfectly healthy athletes who are young who still develop severe pneumonia and still have to go into the ICU for treatment. So it's a very serious communicable disease, and we really need to take it seriously.
This may be a little bit of a side road. I don't mean it to be, and I think you probably would agree. But go back to the NBA, the loss of Kobe Bryant. The news of that was shocking to so many people. It was shocking to me, to my family, and the loss of his daughter. I find myself, and this may be strange, I find myself praying for his wife, the children that are left. Can you speak for a moment, maybe both of you, from two different angles? One from a medical doctor, clinical, maybe one as a pastor, to those people who are going through. We heard a moment ago, a little while ago, of one of our former staff members, relatively young, who died of a massive heart attack, just dropped dead. Can you speak for a moment about people who this is just one more crisis? They've already gone through the loss of a loved one, they're dealing with cancer, and now, lo and behold, they're dealing with the coronavirus, isolation, these other things. I thought to myself, how does Kobe Bryant's wife deal with this right now in light of everything else she's been dealing with? As an example, and how do we minister, maybe, Reggie, how do we minister to how do we check on those people? What responsibility to the people who are, this is just one more thing put on their plate?
So one of the things that comes to mind for me is Joe. So over time, he lost everything. He lost his wealth, he lost his status, he lost his family, and he was left in a very devastating situation where he really had to lean on the Lord. And in his case, he had friends who came to visit, some who were very helpful, and over time, they kind of weren't as helpful as I'm sure he wanted them to be. So one of the most important things that we can consider when sort of reaching out to people who have a heavy trauma experience, I think is sort of what we're discussing here. I think what we can do is sort of meet them where they are. One, we need to listen. We need to hear their hearts and let them tell us sort of what we need. I wonder what a difference it would have been for Job if his friends had said, what can we do for you? Instead of man, you must have been sinning. It's your fault that you lost everything. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
As I think about it, one of the first things I think about is usually in times of difficult tragedy, there are usually a lot more questions than there are answers. And even as a minister of the gospel, there are times, and this is something I had to learn over time, is that there are times when people are just grieving and they need the space to grieve. Sometimes it's not Q&A time. It's not time for me to provide the answers because ultimately, even now as a minister of the gospel and finishing up that training, sometimes it's not my job to give an answer to the hope. Sometimes that's for me to leave up to God to speak and begin to deal in this person's life and help them see what they're going through. Sometimes it's not my place to step in, intervene, and say, well, this could have happened, and blah, blah, blah. They need to be able to work through the pain. And here's the thing. All I am is a conduit for them to look at God, right? My answer is always, like, even when, just recently, over the holidays, on Thanksgiving or Christmas, I preached a eulogy. And one of the things I realized, even in that eulogy, is that, my job as, preacher, pastor, minister, is to always point people to God. And because ultimately God is the one who is omniscient. He's the one who has the answer to the questions that they're looking for, the why. Because usually that's what happens in times of confusion and uncertainty, right? The first question is always why, right? Well, I have to realize that sometimes it's not always my place to give the whole why. That's up to God because God has reasons behind why things happen and when they happen. And we sometimes don't see it immediately, but down the road we begin to have clarity about, wow, God, that's what you were trying to do. Brother Tim, do you guys want to add?
No, I think that's excellent. I do. Let me ask you a question because I know we're on Facebook Live.
Sure.
Are any questions coming in?
At the moment, we don't, but let me reiterate to those of you who are watching, if you have a question concerning worry, anxiety, even if you have a few questions concerning the COVID-19 pandemic, feel free to comment in the box of the comments of the live stream, and if you put them there, we'll definitely be happy to answer those questions as much as this time will allow us. But I think that's the most important thing is just being a presence and allowing people, being able to minister people to where they are. Because sometimes they just don't need us to answer all the questions right now. They just need space to get over what they're getting through. And then all you do is be the presence there. Like, man, imagine if Job's friends had just been the shoulder to lean on to cry, rather than the questioning voice of, did you sin? Or, come on, give it up. You did this, didn't you? Or whatever the case may be. So.
Well, I think going back, to me, because Kobe Bryant was such a central figure, to me, as I was thinking about that, and I prayed for his wife, prayed for his other daughters. People who are already dealing with a crisis, a trauma, a medical condition, and then all of a sudden this happens, their thought is, God, it can't get much worse. They start losing their perspective. And even, let me ask again, Dr. Glenn here, a person can lose their desire to live. If it's bad enough if you're going through the coronavirus, you're being isolated, you're already alone, maybe a senior adult, maybe a single, maybe it's a man who's lost his job, his boss has just basically terminated him. At the same time, his wife's laid off. Financially, they're living from week to week. What can be done for that person who right now may be listening, who may be struggling even with a desire to go on with a life? Can you speak to what do they need to look for? Where can they get help? And what can we do as a church to help them?
Good question. When a person goes through significant tragedy, and certainly a number of tragedy that follow each other, it's not uncommon for someone to find themselves being severely depressed. And what that depression looks like is they may not have a desire to eat, they may not have a desire to socialize, they may lose their desire to enjoy things that they used to do. They may have difficulty sleeping. And when someone develops these symptoms, all of that without treatment could lead to a level of severity where a person becomes suicidal. And at that point, it is vital that you reach out to someone. I know a lot of people will consider their pastor as their first line. So it is important for pastors to be aware of how to manage someone who's suicidal. And we consider that in psychiatry to be a psychiatric emergency. This is the time when it's important to get the person to an emergency room so that they can be evaluated. They may need to be admitted to the hospital and treated.
Can I ask you something here? My family doctor, David Fleming, Dr. Fleming, can they approach their family doctor and just simply say, maybe give a little bit of that history, and then their doctor in turn refer them?
So we do lean on primary care physicians to treat some mental health symptoms. But during this time, many primary care doctors are overwhelmed treating cases of COVID-19. So it might be important to try to get the person to a mental health professional first during these circumstances. But once we're out of this COVID-19 crisis, absolutely, get the person to their primary care doctor. But again, this is an emergency. It's important to consider how soon can the primary care doctor evaluate them, and how will you keep them safe until they can be evaluated by the primary care
Because
doctor.
we're not just talking, and we're not just talking about a person making that diagnosis about themselves. More often, it will be a family member or a friend who recognizes some of those traits or those tendencies. They're not eating, they're not sleeping well, or they're sleeping all the time.
Absolutely.
They're not coming out, they're not answering the phone. They're pulling into some kind of shell or hole. And that person would have to be the front line, I guess, to be able to go to a pastor, somebody say, I'm worried about my brother, my sister, my mom, my dad, grandparent. I'm worried about this work associate who I feel like they need help. So that, so I'm glad you listed some of the symptoms that could you say them one more time? If you see these things.
Absolutely. Difficulty sleeping, loss of interest in things that you previously enjoyed, excessive guilt, low energy, difficulty concentration, poor appetite, slow movement, or really feeling really excited and moving too much, or suicidal thoughts.
And I think it's also incumbent upon pastors too, if you start to notice this in some of your members, please move towards helping or pointing them in the right, because I know that even as a pastor, like, not everyone feels comfortable with reaching out or at least trying to be, I guess, a mental health counselor in that sense, but please be aware of those symptoms and please try to point people or help people get assistance so they can move into the right direction. Even, I've learned, I think I've learned enough to know that, when you see people in those circumstances, like, even if you're not able to help them, point them in a direction where they can't get help. Don't let them. Go ahead.
And a lot of people now run church, so, people who run church are watching this, and they may say, what do I do? And let me say this, we're one church, but we do care about people. And you can email any of us. I'm Jeff Parker at ssbaptistchurch.com. We then, because we're tied to Tamara and Dr. Glenn, we can immediately, if we feel like Reggie or I put you in her direction, and then she in turn can place you maybe or point you in the place you need to go. A lot of people may need advice too. They're not ready to say, I want to get psychiatric help for a family member or friend, but I do need somebody to talk to determine if this is a necessity or not.
And again, for mild symptoms of anxiety or depression, sometimes people find help with their pastor or with their primary care doctor. But it is important to recognize when it's a psychiatric emergency. And again, we do consider suicidal thoughts to be a psychiatric emergency.
Okay. I know we're running short on time, but I would like to at least hit another one of these particular scenarios, if you don't mind. Let's see. So, if you would, number 3 here. I'm a working mom who is transitioning to working home. I have small children. All of them are under the age of 10. And how do I balance working from home? And Tamara, this is probably something you definitely would like to tackle. But how do I balance working from home and continue to meet the while helping my children continue meeting academic goals?
I'm glad we circled back to this. Brother Junky mentioned this earlier on in our talk. I'm glad that we've arrived back here now. So balance is something that is an ever elusive target. It's something that we work towards achieving when we're busy and at work, and when we're working to raise a family and take care of a husband and be a good sister, friend, and daughter. I mean, so there are lots of hats that many women wear at any given time. My thoughts on achieving balance come from Priscilla Shire, Tony Evans' daughter in Dallas, Texas, who was also in the movie War Room. She says that balance is, we often think of balance being like having a different pail for each area of our life. So again, the mother pail, and the Christian pail, and the wife pail, and on and on and on. So we tend to think of balance being, okay, I have each one filled as much as it needs to be. But in reality, what balance is figuring out which pail needs the most attention at any given moment. Pulling that pail to the forefront, filling that as much as you can, and then doing as much as you can in each of the other pails. So, while we all work to be perfect and excellent in every area of life, it's also important to do as much as we can to meet each and every need as we go about life. One of the other things that comes to mind is the parable of the talents. Some have been given 10 talents, some have been given 5, and some have been given 1. And God does trust some with more to do than He trusts others with. And it's because He trusts us. No, you know what? I don't really believe He trusts us. He knows that He will give us the strength to accomplish everything that He's called us to do. He is never surprised by the things that He adds to our plate. And if He's given us the task to do, He'll give us the ability to accomplish it as well. It's just important for us to figure out where along our continuum does the pail need to be. And again, give that as much attention as possible. Not forgetting the other pails, but doing as much as you can for each of the pails while filling the one that takes precedence.
Well, even in that question, as I read the question, one of the things I've been thinking about, especially I think that's come to light in the area now that people are, like especially for at least the next month in Mississippi here, kids are out of school until April 17th, is trying to supplement our children's education. Now, of course, if you want to know how things are going, of course, one of the places you can look is the social media, right? And there are several people who are trying to do the best they can to educate their child. But then several people have made allusions to the fact that, listen, on the first day of school, the teacher quit and the kids are running wild. It really is. It can be difficult trying to, become, not only, you're their mom or their, mom or dad for that, for that reason, for that matter, but then trying to figure out a way to educate your child, make sure they're not missing much in the way of enrichment in this time off. It can be difficult, but I think it's worth at least addressing that maybe not everybody is is really uber equipped to be able to teach their kid at home. So what do you do then? What can a parent who may be trying their best, but it just may be so frustrating that they're just running out of it. It's just by the end of it, they're just
here again, let's take spiritual education. Let's take church. You have been effective, and our sound people, Eric and others, in providing, let's say, children. We provide a children's church where kids can go now. They can view our YouTube channel, see Bethany, who's overseeing our children's church, who's still teaching a lesson. Lifeway has made available stuff that would be normally copyrighted, has put them in the hands of churches during these times to incorporate not only your normal educational process, but they've even supplemented with videos and training and equipment. So people today, in a lot of ways, have a lot of tools out there that people in the academic world, in the educational world, in those institutions can point parents. You know, I was thinking to myself, I was out there getting fishing gear ready. And I thought to myself, you know, I never seem to be able to tie a knot that can hold it. It seems to slip. So I sat there watching YouTube of experts teaching me how to tie a knot on a hook, teaching me how to rig up my, my various different poles, crappie and bass and those things. There are a lot of tools out there floating around that are available to parents right now. Beyond that, I look at my oldest son, whose birthday is today. What he did, he took his boys and his wife, all three boys, and they went out on a boat and they fished. We can't forget what this Chinese woman was trying to say to the American people. You have a window here. And my fear is two fears. Number one, that parents get so caught up over the academic training of their children, they forget this window they have to build into their lives, to reestablish relationships, to pour into cooking or going fishing or doing the things. We could look at this as we've had a reprieve, a vacation for parents to reinvest in the relationships they have with their children.
Yeah,
you know.
And that's what I was thinking about. As I was asking that question, I mean, it's twofold thing. Like on one hand, there are children that need to be engaged in some academic pursuit. And I believe that there's enough, in fact, for parents who may not know, I'll mention this very quickly as I make my point, is that right now there are a lot of schools, a lot of educational centers that are being offered free online education, like there are educational platforms that you would have to pay monthly for that are being offered for free. You probably want to check with your local public school because your local public school probably has a license to use those tools for free for maybe the next month or so. So like for instance, in our household, our local school has gotten a license to use, one is called Adventure Academy, you probably see commercials, and ABC Mouse. Once again, that's through the school, that's free for the time being. I mean, we may have to pay for it later, but that's one way to, even as teachers, people are getting frustrated, you can still have them have a little bit of educational pursuit without necessarily pulling your hair out. But then also, Brother Jeff, I wanted to move on to what you mentioned about, one of the things that I mentioned during our online service last Sunday was at the very end, I talked about Ephesians chapter 5. In Ephesians chapter 5, it says to make the most of every opportunity, or in some versions it says redeem the time, for the days are evil, right? And so it's the idea that, although we may see this as work stoppage and messing up my daily schedule and all these different things, one of the things that I've relished is that for the last week or so, I've had my wife and my two kids at home with me all day long. Now, of course, there comes some times when people get in closed spaces for a long period of time, you can get a little stir crazy. I think that'll happen to many people, right? But the reality is, it's been such a treasure for me because usually, people's days are, think about it, you wake up early, you disperse, kids at school, work, you come back home, dinner, bath, bed, and then you do it all over again. Think about the time, let's just assume that, with the assumption that things will go back to normal on April 17th, even though we don't know what the Lord has in store right now. The reality is we can break from our daily routines and we can reestablish relationships with our children. We can do stuff out of the ordinary and there being no penalty, so to speak. I know that there are parents who are working from home and trying, and we still want to be, we still want to have integrity in doing that. But think about the idea too that, this is one of those few times where your child gets to be with you this much time outside of a holiday. And so it's a gift. And so we need to make the most opportunity to make sure that we're planning it, that we're, having fun together, eating meals together, enjoying each other's company. This is the time to teach them something that you've been wanting to teach. Because we always say, when I get a chance, I'm going to teach this person this. Well, now is that time. Instead of us putting it off or trying to do it on the weekend and then realize, oh yeah, you'd rather sleep on the weekend, or you have to go here on the weekend, or do whatever it is. Now is the time to make the most of our time.
Well, and let me interject here. Mm-hmm. This can go down as the most enjoyable, memorable, life-changing event in our lives. In other words, we could 20 years, 30 years from now, have our children look at us. And when you start laughing at Christmas and you're sitting around talking about memories, and all of a sudden they light up, they're now grown, they're bringing their children back. And Abigail looks at you and says, Mom, do you remember the pandemic? Dad, do you remember how much fun? And she starts giving these memories and recollections of how life so drastically changed, but how rich it was for her in her mind. And, because memory is like that. You take memory courses are based on the ability to shock the mind, to startle it, so that it remembers something, material or something. And we don't remember the day-to-day routine of life. Right. But you let a car wreck, you let something severe happen, even a tragedy, and we never forget that. Yeah. And so it can be a positive.
Definitely. No, I definitely agree. Let's see. I do have one question, and although it's kind of I think he means something humorous, but I think he's also a little bit serious about this. I'm just going to ask this question, okay? One question online says, is Dr. Glenn available for counseling once social distancing is lifted for non-COVID-19 subjects?
So again, I'm doing sleep medicine this year, but hopefully in the fall, I'll start seeing psychiatric patients again.
And you have them on both sides of you.
Okay. Let's see. So, all right. So we have it's actually just a little bit after 7. And as of right now, I want to make sure I reiterate really quick before we start coming towards the end, unless you guys have a couple other parting shots you'd like to take. But I want to make mention that if you're watching right now, if you have a question, now's the time to put it in our comment box so that we can explore. So feel free right now if you would like to add a comment. And as you are adding this comment, I'm going to give these guys a chance to essentially kind of make a couple of other parting shots or things they would like to add into this conversation outside of the question. So I'm going to start with Dr. Glenn.
So I'd just like to reiterate the importance of taking social distancing as seriously as possible. Physicians are on the front line putting their lives on the line to make sure that patients who need to be treated can be treated. They worry about taking this virus home to their children, to their husbands, some who may have comorbid health diagnoses, and even to their parents and grandparents. So they're doing everything that they can to make sure that they're available to treat those who need to be treated. But let's do our part and be there for doctors by staying away from crowds larger than 10, by staying at least 6 feet apart from other people. In the grocery store, consider not walking on the same aisle with someone, or making sure that you're staying as far apart as you can. When you're standing in line at the grocery store, use your basket or your buggy as a buffer. So you stand 6 feet behind the person in front of you, and then make sure your buggy is a little bit away from you, so that you can put enough distance between you and the other person. So let's really work hard to maintain our own boundaries with other people. Again, doctors are working so hard and are sometimes putting their own lives at stake to be there for you. And unfortunately, with this virus, we have to rely on the public to do their part so that we limit the number of cases that are being spread.
Dr. Jeff Barker?
Well, you know, we tended to look at women, but we know there are a lot of men out there that struggle right now, may feel inadequate. They may feel like they've been laid off their job. They may feel like right now they can't bring home a salary. Financially, the stress of that is weighing on them. They're probably going to be private about it, not necessarily disclosing the emotions and the stress they're feeling to their wife or even to their children. So men a lot of times will pull to themselves and can very, very quickly come to a point that they are ready to just break. We're here, Reggie and I especially. Tamara can give us guidance, but a lot of times a man just needs somebody to counsel, to encourage him. So, you know, we're here for that. I have a heart for men. Men, let me also say, your wife, your children, they need to see you positive. You know, you are also a little bit of a picture of security to that family. They're trusting you to provide that leadership. And so at the same time, you've got to step up, be that man of faith, you know, leading your family in devotion, in Bible reading, leading your family to pray together, letting your children see you come in there, praying over their bed, praying with them at night, you know, being a man of faith. Be a man of fun, you know, keep a sense of humor. That lets your family know that you see life on the other side. Hey, and positive. You know, we're not going to be here for very long. We're going to get through this. We're going to be all right. You kids, we're going to make it. That's important. But men, privately, if you're struggling, we want you to know we love you, we're praying for you, and we're here if you should need us.
And I will tag along to what Brother Jeff said. I may have said it early in the session, but I want to repeat. I want to make sure I lead in with a couple of things. Number one, there is a difference between having a concern and a worry. A concern is something that you see a problem with, and you want to, and you know that it's something that needs to be addressed. It's kind of the idea of like, when I think of a concern, I think of like, that's it, there being a leak, right? And now it's not necessarily taking the boat down yet, but you know you need to repair the leak before it gets bad, right? But I think of a worry as being something that controls you, right? It's something that you talked about, something that carries you about in various directions, right? So a lot of times we, as well, men and women, I think, we sometimes will try to treat something as a concern when in reality it's a worry. And you need to have the wisdom to know the difference between the two. When you are experiencing worry, when something is so prevalent on your mind that it is carrying you away, it's having you to go to and fro, that is a time you need to pause and recognize that you need God to help bring you back in, that you need God's word to comfort you, that you need to be able to get a focus about yourself and be able to have a plan, right? When you have a concern, there's usually a plan to carry it out. When there's usually a worry is something that takes us so to and fro that we have no plan. We just have no plan on how we're going to solve, right? But now that leads into something I want to say to end with. Psalms 94:19. Here's what it says. It says, once again, just for you guys who are online, Psalms 94:19. It says this: when anxiety was great within me, your consolation brought me joy. In the midst of all of our struggles, even though there is uncertainty, there's questions that we can't answer, remember that we can find consolation in God's word. And so I encourage you, out of all the things that we've said, and all these things are very important, but one thing you need to make a habit, and Dr. Glenn has already mentioned this, but this is a time where we need to grow closer to Christ. This is a time where we need to be diving into God's word and repairing that or restoring or help to build up relationships so that we're able that when things are quite, maybe not, when we get over this thing, you're in a better position than you were before you went into it. And so my hope, and I believe the hope of the hope of everybody on this panel, is that more than anything, you will take the opportunity to grow your relationship with God, because from your relationship with God, everything else flows, right? So that means when your relationship with God is healthy, we tend to make all of our other relationships healthy, whether that's your marriage, whether that's your relationship with your children, whether that's your relationship with your neighbors, co-workers, and everybody alike. So I think if we start at the source and make sure that our relationship is good with God. Well, with all that being said, know that we love you. For anybody out here who watches this video, we love you. We're praying for you. And remember, this time that we have right now is momentary. There will be a time where this does not affect us in any way. And my hope is this, is that on the other side of this, we'll be changed and we'll be different. But more importantly, we'll be strengthened in God for what happens. It's because of the trials that we go through that strengthen us so that we're able to walk the walk of faith with more integrity. And so with all that being said, we love you. We thank you for attending this time of talk. Remember that this will be re-aired or rebroadcasted or be uploaded to ssbaptistchurch.com, as well as this will be in our Facebook feed. So if somebody had a chance to if anybody who didn't get a chance to see it, or maybe they're not getting home from work as early as it is right now, please share, comment, share this over so other people can have some hope. Because more than anything, people need hope. And my hope is that you will help provide it to them by sharing God's word and by sharing encouraging videos and live streams like this. With that being said, for Dr. Tamara Glenn and for Dr. Jeff Parker, you guys have a great night. We love you, and we thank you for watching. Thank you very much.
Amen.